Good morning, Chapel Springs. Welcome to week 3 of our series on the Odyssey. So this may shock you, but I'm not a gamer. And unlike Pastor Scott, I chose not to Google things and then pretend like I know what I'm talking about because I know I would get caught. So I'm not a gamer, but here's what I do know a lot about. I actually know a lot about journeys. I know a lot about odysseys. I've experienced them in my own life, and an odyssey is a long spiritual quest or voyage, usually marked by many changes or transformation. A long spiritual quest or voyage usually marked by many changes or transformation. With that definition, how many of you are on an odyssey? Here's another name for it. It's called discipleship. It's called following Jesus. This is what he called us to. He called us to this odyssey. I use the word pilgrimage a lot. We see this concept all the way throughout Scripture, that we are on a journey with God, and it's not so much a physical one, though there it is to some extent, but it is much more about what's inward and that journey that we're taking in the depths of our being. Do me a favor and just let's start off with the prayers. Palms up with me. And just take a deep breath, and I want you to pray this prayer with me. Creator of the world, eternal God, we have come from many places for a little while. Redeemer of humanity, God with us, we have come with all our differences, seeking common ground. Spirit of unity, go between God, we have come on journeys of our own, to a place where journeys meet. So let us take time together, for when paths cross and pilgrims gather, there is much to share and celebrate. Amen. This is a place where our paths cross every week. Hopefully not every other month. Every week we come together as pilgrims. We're on a journey, and we're here to celebrate God and what he's doing in our lives, but we're here to share with one another as well. We should be interacting with each other out in the foyer, in our classes, encouraging each other, praying for one another, as some of us are encountering difficult places on our journeys, on our odysseys. We are in Hebrews 11, and we're talking about faith. And the writer of Hebrews, he was writing to a group of Christians, many who had been Jews, and they had given their lives over to the Messiah, Jesus. And what they discovered is what we all discover at some point, is that following Jesus is really following him into the unknown. And they ran into persecution, and they were suffering greatly. And many of them had decided to turn their back from Jesus. And so this writer is laying it out for them and saying, listen, you can't go back. This is where Judaism was pointing to, Jesus. So there's no returning. You've got to persevere. You've got to keep going on this journey that you're on. And so he calls them to faith, and it's faith in the unknown. And here in Hebrews 11, 1 through 2, these are our verses, our key verses for the series. Let's say it together. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. Commended. I said committed. They weren't committed at all. They were commended. We feel like we're going to get committed half the time, I think, when we're following Jesus, right? So they were commended for their faith. And we need to persevere in our faith just like them. And that's what the writer here in Hebrews is telling them. And so as we get into Hebrews 11, verses 8 through 10, he brings up a well-known figure that every one of them would know, the man Abraham. And this is what he says. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. I want you to head over to Genesis chapter 12. And as you're doing that, I want to talk for a moment about the phrase here in Hebrews 11, when called to go, when called to go. And we all know what it's like to be called somewhere. You get a phone call, someone requests you to go from point A to point B. Can't leave your office, come to my office, leave your house, come to my house. We are called to move, to go from one place to another. This is the reality of our journeys. This is the reality of our Odyssey with Christ. We are constantly called to be going. And that's what Abraham was. He was called to go. And in Genesis 12, 1 through 5, it says here, the Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. And I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran, and he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. So where was Abram? Where was he at in life? We know God is calling him somewhere into the unknown, but where is he at? And I'm not talking about lands. It tells us here where he's at physically. But if we look at verse 30 in chapter 11, it tells us that they were in barrenness. They could not conceive a child. So they were in hopelessness. They were in brokenness. And that's a place a lot of us find ourselves in. If not right now, we will at some point. And most of us probably when we came to Christ, that's where he found us, was in absolute brokenness, fruitlessness, a barren place, a dry place in our lives. And God is saying, I want to take you, Abraham and Sarah, from that place of hopelessness to another place that's kind of unknown right now. So I want to just start off by encouraging you. If you are in that place of dryness, of fruitlessness, of hopelessness, position yourselves to hear God. Spend some time, carve it out just to hear him, because he's probably getting ready to call you to another place. He doesn't ever leave us in our brokenness and our hopelessness. He wants to take us somewhere else. And here's the thing. God could have stepped into their story, fixed the issue, right? and then step back out. But we read the promise. This was much bigger than a child. This was about nations that would be coming back to God, and that God would be blessing the nations through Abraham and his line that would be coming from him. This was them stepping into God's story. They didn't quite understand it, and we never do, right? We never do get the full picture. He just said, go. He just said, go, and they went. I want to look at the fact that there's a really interesting thing here at the very beginning in chapter 12. It says, God says, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household. God is very detailed in what Abraham is to depart from. He's making it clear what he's to leave behind. He is to leave his country, his culture. He's to leave the people, the family, the friends, those who surrounded him. And in that time, their entire family would have been together, all the relatives, extended relatives. Can you imagine? We barely make it through family reunions. But this is how they lived all the time. And that was protection for them. Okay? So to leave that was a pretty big deal. But God He likes to uproot us. We have to be uprooted before we can get where we need to go. And there's a lot that we need to be uprooted from. And so as you have stepped out in faith to follow God on this Odyssey, know that He's calling you to leave things behind. Not all those things are bad. Some were good. They help develop you. They help create who you are. But God may say, that's not for where we're heading. I need you to leave it. But I want to take a moment and talk about those things that aren't necessarily healthy. We don't spend a lot of time really thinking about where we're leaving, what we're leaving behind as we step out to follow Christ. And look at your family. Look at what you've come from. Look at the dysfunction. Be honest. We're all from dysfunctional families. We're all dysfunctional families, okay? And your kids are going to think you're dysfunctional at some point too. But just pray for everyone involved, and God will work it out somehow. But that's just the sin nature, and so we pick up things. Let me give you an instance. One thing that I used to do as a kid, I had a really hard time just dealing with my emotions, and so I would just go be alone if I were angry, if I were emotional. I just learned how to go be by myself, and I won't go into how that got developed in me, but God revealed this to me here over the last few years. And so when something happens, my tendency is to immediately withdraw. And it's just a safety, security, and coping mechanism. But God has told me, Stephanie, there's some things with that is hindering you from where I need to take you. So you've got to leave that behind. And it continually comes up. It came up this week. It came up. Pastor Josh was there. Something happened. It was horrifying for me. And I started to grab everything to head home. And I felt God say, no, stay. And I knew one person was down the hall, and it's Pastor Josh. And I texted. I said, please come to my office. And so God's taught me how to bring someone into the moment, so that someone outside can walk me through the emotions, the crisis, and I can feel safe with that. But what would I have done if I just left and I wouldn't have brought the community into it, and I wouldn't have shared it and processed it and heard someone pray over me and speak life over me and speak the truth and not the lie of the moment? So God has said, Stephanie, you've got to leave that in your past, because what happens, that would have triggered something if I left, that I know I would have made a couple unhealthy choices after that. And so I have spent time with God so that in those moments, I hopefully make the right decision. I don't always do that still. And that's the thing with Abraham. You'll see on his journey here over the next couple of weeks, he tends to sometimes reach back to the ways of his culture, the customs. And God's saying, no, what are you doing? That's not the way I'm calling you to live now. Okay, does this make sense? So you need to ask the Spirit to help you identify those things that you need to walk away from and leave behind. Mark 8. I love the chapter 8 of Mark. This, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus starts laying it out for his disciples that discipleship is serious business. And he calls them to depart everything. And listen what he tells his disciple. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Those are strong words. We've got to deny where we've come from in the way of not picking it up and carrying it with us. We've got to turn from it. It's our past. And there's things that we have to deny, as I said earlier, that are good, but God's saying they can't go to where you need to go. This is part of laying down our lives, giving ourselves completely over. This is why you see Jesus saying some crazy things, and we don't like to talk about this stuff. But people who would come to him and say, you know, I want to follow you. And then he would say, go sell everything. And I can't do that. Well, you don't really want to follow me. Or I want to follow you, but let me wait for my dad to die so I can then do the responsible thing, bury him, and do what I need, what my custom expects me to do and to be. And Jesus says, no, it doesn't work like that. And that's harsh stuff. He reprioritizes everything. Everything. And it's very radical. It is a radical calling to follow him. We are departing from the ways of our world. And not all the ways are bad. There's some good stuff there. But he's calling us to be in his kingdom and to prioritize him in our life. Here's the other interesting thing with that first verse. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. To the land I will show you. God is not detailed concerning where we are going. He's not nearly as concerned with us knowing as we are. I wish these things were switched. I don't need to sit and spend a lot of time looking at where I'm going. I just like to get and go somewhere. But no, God actually says spend time departing. We spend a lot more time. This is why when I have a lot of friends who are missionaries, and you get caught up in the excitement of it, and people come around, and it's all wonderful. They're going on mission. I start asking them questions about how are you grieving? Tell me what feelings are going on as you're leaving your grandparents. As people are saying, how can you leave this person or that person at this point? I mean, those are things that are really going on inside of our missionaries. And those are things that, honestly, they should be going on inside of us as well. Because you don't have to be departing to another country for missions to know that we have to depart things in our own lives, okay? But the unknown, what are those unknowns? What are those, where are we going? What are we doing, God? He's not as concerned about it as we are. You know, this really used to annoy me. It annoys me quite a bit. But this is a huge thing for humans, for all of us. That he's just not more detailed with where we're going. And some of us, it bothers us more than others, but if we were all truthful, it bothers all of us. And I've learned over 20 years of vocational ministry, this is the number one thing that people deal with. This is my experience, that people tell me when I talk to them, when I pray with them, it's the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of the unknown. Where am I going? What's going to happen next? And I used to think that this got better. Okay, as I grow older, I'm going to be able to let this go. It doesn't work like that. And I'm sorry, but you guys have confirmed it, because I spend a lot of time with you, especially a lot of older people, and it's still a struggle. It's still this fear. It just looks different. When you're in your 20s and your 30s, it's the unknown of who I'm going to marry. Am I going to have kids? What is my career going to be? Am I going to go to college? Things like that. How is it all going to work out? Then when you get older, loss, the unknown of loss, the loss of physically, am I going to hold up for a good 80, 90 years? What's going to come my way? You have family members that's died from certain diseases. The unknown is of, am I going to struggle with that? Am I going to get that? I know I've been walking with several people who are on the verge of losing their spouse or have lost their spouse. And the unknown, they've never been single. The unknown of that. Aging is a huge unknown. And so I'm amazed at how I even see anxiety in older people just like I do in younger people. This is something we all, as we come together on our pilgrimage today and we're meeting here, these are all things that we struggle with. What is going to happen to me? I know, as a single adult, who's going to take care of me when I'm older? I'm not married. I'm not sure if I have a niece or nephew with their head screwed on, enough. They're young. I got my eyes on the youngest ones right now, praying for hope. But there's good potential in my nephew. My oldest nephew's a good one. But, and I know some of you are like that. You've got your kids who are just a mess, your adult kids. And if you're an adult kid who's a mess, it's normal. But your parents are freaked out because they're thinking, what's going to happen to me? These are the unknowns. Are they going to get themselves together? Are they going to care? And I know it's funny, but the truth is, many of you, it's not. Because you've got grown kids with serious issues. This is part of entrusting ourselves over to God on our journeys and saying, God, I'm yours. I'm on this Odyssey with you. The unknown. The unknowns of life. Genesis 12, 6 through 8, I want to read this here. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Morah at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land, and the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And from there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent. And with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. On his Odyssey, Abram built permanent altars of worship to God, but he pitched temporary tents to live in. He built permanent altars, but he pitched temporary tents. You guys, we tend to do the opposite. On our Odysseys, as we're out and about and we're facing the unknowns, we want to settle. We want to start grabbing onto things. And so we end up building our tents and pitching our altars. We build the things that should be temporary. We try to secure ourselves in that. And then we come and we kind of pitch our altars of worship here and there, wherever we get space or time. we've got to switch it back. We have to build these places in our lives, these spaces where we say, this is for God. This is God time. This is God space. Everything else is temporary. It is. Everything is. As much as you love your family and your job, whatever it is that you just love, it's temporary. Our worship to God is eternal. So, if we get that straight and we are building our altars and we're pitching our tents, everything will flow right from there, okay? We will know when we are in those hard seasons, God's got me. God's got me. Whatever unknown I'm in, God's got me. Because we keep coming back to his presence because it's stable, it's there, and it's consistent. We're bad about this. Look at your own life. It's easy to start pitching things that should be built and building things that should be pitched. So take that with you today and allow the Holy Spirit to maybe just convict you, search you, maybe open up your calendar, your schedule, and go through it with him. Let him show you some things, right? Let him get real with you. So a few years ago, when I was in my 20s, I mentioned, I didn't like the unknown. I still don't really care for it, but I liked it even less in my 20s. And it used to just drive me nuts, but here's what it did. It drew me to God. And I just would go to his presence, and I started wrestling with all this. And when I was in my my doctoral work, and I was coming toward a completion, and I was sat down with a professor, and he said to me, Stephanie, what do you want to spend the next couple years researching and writing on, and doing a project on? And I threw something out that I thought would make them happy, and that would work well with what I was doing at the time. And he said, yeah, that's good. That sounds interesting. But why don't you tell me what you really want to write on? And so I just started opening up to him, and I said, I want to write on the mystery of God. I want to write on how he draws us into the unknown. And so I just poured out my heart, and he said, yeah, that's what you're going to write on right there. So here's the title, part of the title, Adventure into the Unknown, Rediscovering and Embracing the Mystery of God as a Dimension of the Normal Christian Life. Because that's what I came to conclude, is that this is normal. Being drawn out into the unknown is the normal Christian life. And we think it's abnormal. We end up panicking and thinking, I've done something wrong. No, it is the normal thing. It should be normal. Just like, Abram lived as strangers in the land. He lived as a foreigner. So are we supposed to be here too. That's the norm. We should be called strange every once in a while, okay? And if that should be normal for you. If people thinking you've lost your mind a little bit because you're making decisions that really just, it doesn't make sense in the natural because it's been birthed in the spirit. That's the normal. That's normal. So in my studies and research, I came upon the early Celtic church, and the early Celtic church they were established primarily by St. Patty to some of you guys who love him. He evangelized Ireland, and they readily accepted the gospel. Like, they were so hungry. Their culture just easily absorbed the gospel of Jesus. And they ended up, Ireland was so impacted, it ended up changing all of Europe from their transformation. But I became fascinated in my studies with some 5th century monks who had a desire for the unknown. And this really impacted me, and I want to read you a little bit. I want to read you their story, if you will allow me to read you a story this morning. It says, many of the Celtic monks found the journey leading them to a level of communion with God that only extreme adventure could offer. While early monks of the Near East journeyed into the desert in order to meet God in solitude, the Irish monks sailed across oceans in search of similar empty places where they could encounter God in stillness. Very few places can rival the sea when it comes to adventure, especially during a time when much of the world had yet to be discovered. A sea adventure offered a monk an opportunity to release all expectations and trust to God. For the pilgrim, seeking God is the pilgrimage. These Celtic monks were willing to enter the unknown to find their way to God. These saints set sail in a boat known as a coracle. It's a hide-covered boat, and many of them took oars, rowing until exhausted, leaving the remainder of the voyage up to God's guidance. Others set sail, abandoning their oars completely, testifying of their confidence in God for the destination. They trusted God to take them to the land where they would do missionary work, establish a monastery, or simply be alone with the Creator. Their faith rested in the knowledge that God could be trusted for both the voyage and the destiny. Some monks left for sea alone, while others took a group of monks with them. Some had a destination in mind, while others went out totally abandoned to God's destination for them. They left saying, "We will follow God. If he takes us to Spain, fine. If he takes us to Gaul, fine. Let us throw away the compass, for we have no need to know where we are. We are following Christ. He guides our coracle. We seek the center of his will. Everything else is just geography." They lived in complete surrender to God. The adventure sprang from a heart in search of God, not from a need for excitement. Living a life of adventure had little to do with going out to sea. It was about living out the depths of their beings. In essence, it was about an internal adventure, not an external one. However, these saints felt compelled to go externally deep in order to live internally deep. And because the monks connected deeply to God through creation, they trusted him, the creator of the waters on which they sailed. God, whose power is over the waters, would be prayed to for strength, for protection, and for deliverance. There would be many times on a long voyage that all strength was gone and their only hope was in love and compassion of God. As turbulent as the waters proved, their exhaustion from fighting the sea led them ultimately to abandon themselves fully to God. Did you catch that? If you're exhausted, you're in a good place. It's like being in that barren place. You've got nothing left. And God says, I can work with that. I can work with that because we just start letting things go. None of it means anything at that point. The total number of monks who embraced the challenge and left the security of the monastery to endeavor such a voyage remains unknown. Although stories have survived the centuries to reveal some of the adventurous spirits, many of them actually did die on sea as they had just completely abandoned themselves to God, which they would not have seen as failure. That was ultimately, they wanted to be with God and to see him. So that's pretty inspiring. That's amazing. Do you have your coracle? There's a guy by the name of Brendan the Navigator, Brendan the Voyager. He's one of the most well-known monks who took a group. They set out into the unknown, and you can read his adventures. They're crazy. He inspired Christopher Columbus, this monk did. And So that's a statue in Ireland of Brendan in his coracle on the rough waters of the open sea. I want to read what Brendan wrote as he pondered leaving the safety of the shore. He said, "Shall I abandon, O King of mysteries, the soft comforts of home? Shall I turn my back on my native land and my face toward the sea? Shall I put myself wholly at the mercy of God, without silver, without horse, without fame and honor? Shall I throw myself wholly on the King of kings, without sword and shield, without food and drink, without a bed to lie on? Shall I say farewell to my beautiful land, placing myself under Christ's yoke? Shall I pour out my heart to him, confessing my manifold sins and begging forgiveness, tears streaming down my cheeks? Shall I leave the prints of my knees on the sandy beach, a record of my final prayer in my native land? Shall I then suffer every kind of wound the sea can inflict? Shall I take my tiny coracle across the wide, sparkling ocean? O Christ, will you help me on the wild waves?" I think that's a prayer that comes up from all of us. Christ, will you help me on the wild waves? Will you help me? You know, the thing with Jesus, he's our beside me God. Remember, I talked about that a few weeks ago. He's the part of God that's beside us. He's our companion. He's on the wild waves. He's on the wild waves with us. He hasn't left us alone. Let's stand to our feet. I want to talk to those of you who you feel like you're in your coracle. I wear a coracle around my neck. This is how I feel most days, most weeks, just kind of out there. You feel like that. You feel like you've climbed into your little coracle and you're out there. Some of you are on rough waters right now. Others of you, you just may be sitting there on the shore and you know it's time to depart. For some of you, that means following Jesus. You've never made that decision. You can make it here today. But some of you, you need to take some serious look at what you're departing as you get into your coracle. Where is God sending you from? It's okay if you don't know where you're heading. Where are you at right now, and what does he want you to leave? And some of you, you know there's some serious issues that you've carried with you. There are addictions. And God wants you to surrender them today. So I want to invite you, I want to open this altar for anyone. I know we prayed earlier, but for those of you who maybe you didn't raise your hand, or those of you who want to come get prayer some more, those of you who identify with this and say, yeah, I'm coracle man, I'm coracle woman. I feel like I've got one, or I'm ready to throw it out so the wind of the Spirit can take me wherever. Wherever you're at, whatever you identify with, we want to come around and just pray with you. So I want to encourage you right now. Altars are open. Come forward. We're going to have people just surround you, encourage you, speak life over you.